Can you talk about the biology of addiction?
For sure. You see, if you look at the brain circuits involved in addiction, and that's true whether it's a shopping addiction like mine or an addiction to opiates like a heroin addict, we're looking for endorphins in our brains. Endorphins are the brain's feel-good, reward, pleasure, and pain relief chemicals. They also happen to be the love chemicals. They connect us to the universe and to one another. Now, that circuitry in addicts doesn't function very well. As the circuitry of incentive and motivation, which involves the chemical dopamine, also doesn't function very well. Stimulant drugs like cocaine and crystal meth, nicotine and caffeine all elevate dopamine levels in the brain, as does sexual acting out, as does extreme sports, as does workaholism and so on. Now the issue is, why do these circuits not work so well in some people? Because the drugs in themselves are not surprisingly addictive. And what I mean by that is that most people who try most drugs never become addicted to them. And so there has to be susceptibility there. And the susceptible people are the ones with these impaired brain circuits, and the impairment is caused by early adversity rather than by genetics.
What do you mean early adversity?
She's like, what do you mean by this is caused by early addiction? So like, there's some interesting studies of like, when grandma goes to the doctor and they give her fucking crystal meth or whatever the hell they have laying around these days, and some hard drugs that are easy to get addicted to.
Okay, sure.
Why is it that when she gets out of the hospital, she's not addicted? It's like, oh, she has something better to do. She has a family. She's resolved or whatever. So a lot of people get hard drugs, the doctor drugs that are meth-like or whatever, cocaine-like.
And then they don't become an addict.
Right, they don't become an addict.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not, some drugs are very chemically addictive. But the point that he's making is a lot of drugs should be very addictive. How come some people aren't addicted to drugs? And why are some people addicted to drugs? Getting the drugs out of the way of it, right?
Okay.
So what he's tying to is like the people that have, their brains are in that trauma state.
Yeah.
The need for the love chemicals, the dopamine, whatever's going on in the biology of it.
Okay.
There's a deficiency there. Because healthy grandma is getting a nice loving brain. She's not feeling like she needs an outside source to have her brain feel better.
Okay, yeah.
And if your brain is in a fucked off, deteriorated state, then outside chemicals are going to feel great because you're not naturally producing that yourself.
Okay, so
right?
the theory is you get your hippocampus fucked up, right? Early on, because you get smacked, and now you're like fear and trauma or whatever, and then therefore your way of stimulating normal dopamine levels would be in some kind of shortcut way. Right. So therefore drugs would be higher used because of the need for the shortcut way.
Exactly.
Okay.
I'm curious about your own history, Gabor Mate.
Yeah.
You were born in Nazi-occupied Hungary.
Well, ADD has a lot to do with that. I have attention deficit disorder myself. And again, most people see it as a genetic problem. I don't. It actually has to do with those factors of brain development, which in my case occurred as a Jewish infant under Nazi occupation in the ghetto of Budapest. And the day after the Nazis marched into Budapest in March of 1944, my mother calls the pediatrician and says, would you please come and see my son because he's crying all the time? And the pediatrician says, of course I'll come, but I should tell you all my Jewish babies are crying. The infants don't know anything about Nazis and genocide or war or Hitler. They're picking up on the stresses of their parents. And of course my mother was an intensely stressed person, her husband being away in forced labor, her parents shortly thereafter being deported and killed in Auschwitz. Under those conditions, I don't have the kind of conditions that I need for the proper development of my brain circuits. And particularly, how does an infant deal with that much stress? By tuning it out. That's the only way the brain can deal with it. And when you do that, that becomes programmed into the brain. And so if you look at the preponderance of ADD in North America now, and the 3 million of kids in the States that are on stimulant medication, and the 500,000 who are on antipsychotics, what they're really exhibiting is the effects of extreme stress, increasing stress in our society, on the parenting environment. Not bad parenting, extremely stressed parenting because of social and economic conditions.
Okay, quite a few things. Let me kind of break them down.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I'd say that we're a little bit off on as far as his view of things is that he says, oh, I have ADD, then it's not because of my genetics. So most people will say that I have ADD because of my genetics in some way, shape, or form, which is kind of the mainstream thing that's happening more and more is, real scientists and doctors are finding that, there are genes, what we're seeing, the type stuff, that you are more susceptible to ADD. Like if you are sleep last, play consume, EP, like if you do not, well, I can't even say if you don't have ADD, like you have ADD. Like if you're a super extroverted sleep last, EP, play, you do not. There's no way you do not have ADD.
We generally say if you have blast and play in the top three, you should have a hard time focusing because attention deficit disorder.
Because your brain is designed to.
The attention deficit. So you're having a hard time with attention.
Right. So now that quickly gets into defining terms.
What do you mean by having a hard time with attention?
Right. Exactly. And then how much is that ruining your actual life?
Right.
How much of it, like,
Right.
can you start to get yourself to focus more?
Right.
You know, not saying there aren't extreme cases of it, and the extreme cases of ADD and stuff like that tend to cluster in people that are sleep last, EP, OE, play,
Right,
etc. Right?
right.
It's almost, I
The
don't
trauma
want.
that
I don't want to
happened.
put words in his mouth, but it kind of seems like he's kind of saying like you're kind of born largely as a fresh slate. You know,
Yeah.
rather than you're born an EP, you're going to have these problems no matter what. I don't care if you grew up in the most
Yeah.
ideal environment. If you're an EP, you're going to have ADD problems, even if the environment is fucking perfect.
Right.
Right? Et cetera to every single type.
Right.
He seems to be kind of leaning a little bit more towards we're all kind of fresh slates, we're all kind of blank, and then your environment quickly is what makes you one way or the
Smacks
other.
you one way.
That sounds good,
Right.
but that doesn't seem to be exactly what's happening. It does
Yeah,
seem to be
I would
that
agree.
that you are born with these extreme, because the personality type, which he's not aware of, so how the hell is he supposed to know? He's working
Right.
with the math that he's got.
Right.
It's like, hey, if you're Tony Robbins, you're built like a fucking gorilla.
Right.
That didn't happen because of something you were born. Like, your body's like, I need to be giant and extroverted and big and muscular. Like, no, you're just a double masculine EJ. They're all like that.
Right. So just to give 2 cents on what you're saying there, like the argument is a weird one to me because you'll have situations where you'll have different siblings. I'm like, that's the second what I immediately go to is like, what about same environment, different
Right.
siblings, and they're wildly different.
Right, and they're in the same bad environment. But
In
they're
the same- yes.
they're interpreting it different depending on their type.
Right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we're seeing.
Right. Very much so.
Second little side thing is, it's like, I don't, not that I'm a fucking doctor here, but when I see a lot of people, a lot of kids that do have real ADD,
Right.
They
Right.
do need to take medication to kind of help them balance out or get
Help
jump
'em
started.
focus, help
Their
'em get
whole
going.
life is about how do I David Goggins focus? You know, there's
Yes.
somebody who's ADD.
It does seem to be like, how? What do you mean? Why? How? What is your version of ADD?
Right.
Is it coming in a demon state? I'd be curious about. You know, like
Yeah,
what's
just
that look
that's if I were to throw an answer into that, my guess would be what I see from people that are more my type, that are savor sleep,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, I have ADD, because you'll see a lot of EPs that are like, I have OCD, and they do. They get very
Yes.
over controlling.
Yes, right.
OCD clusters in IJs, and it also clusters in EPs
in their swing state.
in their swing state.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
could it be one of those where you get some over controlling person? They're like, I have ADD. What I see from that, from my guess, so send the hate emails to me, right? Is that what I see is that it's like the OIs are like, I'm so sleepy and I'm so mopey and I'm so Jerry Seinfeld, I'm so in my
and
inner world.
desire so much
Desire
control and
so
focus.
much control. The one time I'm distracted by potato chips, oh my God, why does my brain keep changing the channel? Because, like, what is this guy talking about for 50 years?
The
Is it
same thing.